welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. The first time I heard the alert, I thought it was a glitch. I was in the middle of my night shift at the Crestview Weather Monitoring Station, an isolated outpost meant for tracking severe storms and atmospheric anomalies. Most nights, my job was boring, analyzing wind currents, logging temperature fluctuations, and occasionally reporting anything strange to my superiors at the National Weather Service. But that night, at exactly 2:12 a.m., every screen in the station flickered. The emergency broadcast system, which normally remained inactive unless the government authorized a nationwide alert, suddenly overrode all channels. My laptop screen went black, replaced by a single block of white text. Emergency alert system. Do not approach the black fog. Do not enter the black fog. Do not attempt to communicate with those inside. I frowned, pushing my chair back. It wasn't uncommon for the emergency alert system to issue warnings about hurricanes, wildfires, or even military drills. But this was different. There was no mention of a location, no details, just an ominous, vague warning. I reached for my radio and tuned into the National Weather Service frequency. Static. That was unusual. Our systems had backup generators and satellite connections. Even if the local grid failed, I should have been able to reach the regional HQ. Frowning, I turned to my secondary radar system and checked for weather anomalies in the area. That's when I saw it. A massive black formation was moving across the landscape, stretching several miles wide. At first, I thought it was a storm, but the system classified it as unknown atmospheric event. There were no associated storm patterns, no wind shear, no precipitation. Just an empty void on the screen, crawling forward at an unnatural speed. I double-checked the wind readings. The formation was moving against the wind. That wasn't possible. Weather systems were dictated by atmospheric conditions. Nothing should be moving against the natural currents. A cold chill ran down my spine. I grabbed my personal radio and switched to local emergency channels. Maybe a nearby town had reported something. Maybe this was just a technical error. That hope died quickly. Faint voices crackled through the static. Anyone receiving? This is Clearwater Emergency Services. We have Clearwater, the closest town, about 15 miles east of my station. No power, visibility near zero. People are. The transmission cut off. I turned to my primary comm system and tried to respond. Clearwater Emergency, this is Crestview Weather Station. Repeat, I copy your last transmission. What's your status? Silence. Then, in the distance, the station's exterior motion sensors activated, triggering a proximity alert. I turned to the monitor. The external cameras showed the empty road leading to my station, the surrounding pine trees swaying slightly in the wind. But the sky looked wrong. It was pitch black, not the kind of darkness you get from a cloudy night, where you can still see a faint glow from distant towns. No, this was an absolute void, like the sky had been erased, and it was getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window. I shouldn't have looked. The darkness wasn't just the sky. It was something rolling over the landscape, swallowing the trees, the hills, the road, the black fog, and it was coming straight for me. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The emergency alert still flashed on my laptop screen. Do not approach. Do not enter. My instincts screamed at me to get out, but my job wasn't to panic. I forced myself to think. The station had a backup vehicle, a radio tower, and enough supplies to last a few days. If I left now, I might drive straight into whatever was consuming Clearwater. I needed more information. I pulled up satellite imagery. My screen refreshed, showing a real-time image of the region. The town of Clearwater was gone. Where there should have been lights from street lamps and homes, there was only blackness, like someone had painted over the town with ink. Then my screen flickered again. Emergency alert update. Do not respond to voices calling your name. My mouth went dry. Something primal inside me knew. This wasn't just some freak weather event. This was something alive, and it was learning. Then I heard it, through the static of my radio, beneath the faint howling of the wind. A voice crackled through, a voice that shouldn't be possible. Help! I'm still here. Please, help me. My blood turned to ice. It was my voice, from the radio. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the radio. The voice repeating through the static was mine, down to the exact tone and inflection. It wasn't just similar. It was me. Help! I'm still here. Please, help me. A deep, primal fear rooted me to the floor. The rational part of my brain screamed at me that this was impossible. I hadn't transmitted anything. I hadn't spoken those words, and yet they played back over the radio. I slowly reached out and adjusted the frequency dial, trying to pinpoint the signal's origin. Maybe this was some kind of interference. Maybe a recording of my voice had been hijacked, rebroadcasted by some glitch in the system. But the moment my fingers brushed the dial, the voice changed. Don't go outside. It's watching. My breath caught in my throat. It was still my voice, but I had never said those words. Something was wrong. More than wrong. I had seen strange weather events before, rogue tornadoes, electromagnetic storms, but nothing like this. I grabbed my logbook and scribbled down the details. Time: 2:22 a.m. Unidentified black fog spotted moving against the wind. Emergency alert issued. Avoid the black fog. Town of Clearwater, no radio contact, possible mass blackout. Voice transmission received, identical to my own. My hands shook as I put the pen down. The emergency alert still flashed on my laptop screen, but now it had been updated again. Do not respond to voices calling your name. Do not attempt to aid those inside the fog. I exhaled slowly, willing my heartbeat to steady. This wasn't just some localized power failure. This was something deliberate, something planned. I switched my radio to emergency services and tried again. Clearwater emergency, this is Crestview Weather Station. If anyone is receiving, respond immediately. For a moment, nothing but static. Then, they're all gone. The voice was different this time. A woman's voice. Weak, strained, terrified. My grip tightened around the radio. Who is this? Identify yourself. We tried to run. The fog is everywhere. The voice cracked. She was sobbing now, her breath ragged. It doesn't let go. It doesn't let go. The transmission cut out. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor, my body already moving toward the door. Then I stopped. The emergency alert repeated in my mind. Do not attempt to aid those inside the fog. My stomach twisted. I looked back at my laptop screen, the warning flashing in cold, indifferent text. Whatever this thing was, the government had issued a nationwide warning to avoid it. But I had just heard someone alive in there. Did that mean she could be saved? I clenched my fists. I needed more information. I turned back to my radar system and zoomed in on Clearwater's location. The black fog had spread farther. It was no longer contained to the town. It had begun to move outward, creeping along highways, swallowing farmland and power lines. And then my pulse stopped. A second formation had appeared. A second black fog had formed west of my station. I swore under my breath. That wasn't a storm. That wasn't a natural weather event. That was an entity, and now there were two of them. I grabbed my backpack and began stuffing it with essentials: flashlight, extra batteries, my sidearm, emergency radio. The Clearwater had survivors, I had to know. I flicked on my truck's ignition through the remote starter. The headlights illuminated the empty dirt road ahead, and for the first time, I noticed something strange. The forest was silent. No wind, no insects, no distant sound of animals moving in the brush. Just dead, suffocating silence. I hesitated for only a moment before slinging the backpack over my shoulder. If I left now, I could reach Clearwater in less than 20 minutes. I opened the door. The air was thick, not like humidity, worse, like stepping into a place where the oxygen had been thinned out, hollowed. I climbed into my truck, gripping the wheel tight. The emergency alert repeated one last time on my phone. Do not respond to voices calling your name. I swallowed hard and hit the gas. The road to Clearwater was eerily empty. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating abandoned vehicles along the roadside. Most of them had doors open, like the occupants had fled in a hurry. Some were still running. A pickup truck sat idle on the shoulder, its headlights flickering. The driver's side door hung open, swaying slightly. I slowed down, peering inside. The keys were still in the ignition. A half-empty coffee cup sat in the holder. But no driver, no passengers, like they had just vanished. I gritted my teeth and kept driving. The closer I got to Clearwater, the thicker the darkness became. The stars disappeared, the horizon swallowed by blackness. Then my radio crackled. It's here. It knows you. The woman's voice again, fainter now, struggling. It's inside the fog watching. A movement in the trees caught my eye. I turned my head, and my stomach dropped. A figure stood in the tree line, perfectly still. I slammed the brakes. My headlights washed over it, and I saw its face. Or rather, I didn't. The figure stood there, same build as me, same height, wearing the same uniform, but its face was a blank slate. No features, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, empty skin. Then it raised its hand and pointed at me. My radio screamed with static. Don't go any closer. The figure tilted its head, and I realized something horrifying. It wasn't just copying my appearance. It was learning. The emergency alert updated again. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hands ice cold. New text. Do not look at them. I looked up. The figure was gone. A breath shuddered out of me. My truck idled on the side of the road, the darkness pulsing around me. I felt watched. My options were clear now. Turn back. Pretend I had never heard the distress call. Keep driving into Clearwater, into the unknown. I tightened my grip on the wheel, and then, in the distance, I saw the first tendrils of black fog creeping across the pavement. I should have turned around. Every instinct in my body told me to hit reverse, to gun it back to the safety of my station, to pretend I never heard the distress call. But I didn't, because I knew. If I left now, I'd never stop wondering, never stop hearing that woman's voice, never stop thinking about what I saw in the trees. So I tightened my grip on the wheel and drove forward, toward the black fog that had begun spilling across the road. The moment I crossed its threshold, my headlights dimmed. It wasn't like normal fog, where light scatters in all directions. This was thick, swallowing the beams almost entirely, reducing my visibility to barely a few feet. The dashboard screen flickered, then went black. I cursed under my breath and switched to my backup radio. Clearwater emergency, this is Crestview Weather Station. I'm approaching your location. If anyone can hear me, respond. Silence. I kept driving. My speedometer was still working, but I had no frame of reference for where I was anymore. No landmarks, no lights, just the solid wall of blackness pressing against the truck. Then a shape moved in the fog. I barely caught it, just a flicker of motion outside the driver's side window. A shadow, slipping between the tendrils of mist. I clenched my jaw. Stay focused. But then my headlights caught something ahead. A gas station. Its neon sign flickered weakly, barely piercing through the fog, but it was the first intact structure I had seen. I slowed the truck, pulling into the empty lot. The station was abandoned. A single car sat at one of the pumps, its driver's side door hanging open. The gas nozzle was still inserted into the tank, like someone had been in the middle of filling up, and then vanished. I hesitated. My gut screamed, don't get out, but I needed information. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out of the truck, and immediately noticed something strange. The air was thicker here, not humid, not misty, just dense, like it was pressing against my skin, pushing me down. I swallowed and approached the gas station entrance. The sliding glass doors had been shattered from the inside. Shards of glass crunched beneath my boots. Inside, the store was a mess. Shelves overturned. Snacks and drinks spilled across the floor. The cash register was open, the bills inside untouched. A radio sat on the counter, hissing static. I stepped closer. The moment I reached for the dial, "Don't look at them," I froze. The voice wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the bathroom at the back of the store. I turned my flashlight toward the door. It was slightly ajar, the dim glow of a flickering bulb spilling out into the hallway. A wet cough sounded from inside. I clenched my jaw, took a cautious step forward. "Who's in there?" Silence. Then the emergency alert sound blared from my phone. I nearly dropped my flashlight. My pulse pounded as I pulled the phone from my pocket. The text alert updated in real time. New directive: do not engage with survivors showing signs of exposure. I exhaled sharply. Then the voice from the bathroom whispered, "Please help me." Pause. Then, "I can't see." The hairs on my arms rose. My grip tightened around the flashlight as I reached the bathroom door and pushed it open. The overhead light buzzed weakly, casting a yellow glow over the grimy tile floor. A woman sat slumped against the far wall. She was breathing barely. Her skin was pale, her clothes ripped and damp, like she had been crawling through something wet. Dark stains covered her hands and arms. Her eyes were black, not just the pupils, the entire eye, a deep, oily void where her irises should have been. She turned her head toward me. "You're still here?" My chest tightened. The voice was the same one from the radio, the woman from Clearwater. She tried to lift her hand but winced in pain. I swallowed hard, ignoring the warning flashing on my phone. I crouched down beside her. "What happened to you?" She shuddered, her breath ragged. "The fog. It..." Her voice cracked. "Stay with me," I said. "Tell me what happened." Her hands trembled as she gripped the fabric of my sleeve. Her fingernails were cracked, dirt caked beneath them. "We tried to leave." A whisper. "We tried to run before it got bad." A long, wheezing breath. "But it knew us." A chill crept up my spine. "What do you mean?" She turned her black eyes toward me. "It remembers." Something slammed against the glass storefront. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the fog. The figure stood outside. A man, perfectly still, hands pressed against the broken glass. And his face, it was me. Every detail, from the creases in my uniform to the scar on my chin. But the eyes were empty. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the glass, through the floor beneath me. I took a step back. The emergency alert flashed again. New directive: do not look at them. Do not acknowledge them. Do not let them speak. My double raised a hand, palm facing me. Then its mouth began to move. No sound, just shaping words. The woman gasped sharply, clawing at my arm. "You have to go." Her voice was strained now, urgent. I took another step back. "What is that thing?" She shook her head violently. "Don't look at it. Don't listen." The figure pressed closer against the glass. Its lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then the woman's grip tightened, and she whispered, her voice so low it barely reached me. "It's trying to become you." My heart stopped. I turned back to the door. The glass splintered. The figure outside tilted its head. I grabbed the woman, hauling her to her feet. She screamed in pain but didn't resist. The moment we reached the truck, my phone vibrated again. A new alert. Final directive: you are no longer safe. I slammed the truck into drive, and the black fog surged forward. I floored the gas pedal. The truck's tires screeched against the pavement, struggling for traction as I tore out of the gas station lot. The fog was moving now, shifting unnaturally across the ground, rolling toward us like it had a mind of its own. The woman in the passenger seat gasped for breath, her hands shaking violently. She kept clawing at her own skin, as if trying to peel something off. I risked a quick glance at her. Her eyes, those endless, black voids. I gritted my teeth and refocused on the road ahead. The town of Clearwater was less than a mile away. If there were any other survivors, I had to reach them before the fog did. I grabbed my radio and switched to the emergency services channel. "This is Crestview Weather Station. I am currently en route to Clearwater with a possible survivor. Is anyone receiving?" Nothing but static. I twisted the dial, switching to another frequency. "Any law enforcement or emergency responders? Do you copy?" Still nothing. The woman shuddered, Her breathing came in short, broken gasps. "They're not answering," she whispered. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I noticed her head jerked toward me, her pupils dilating. Then, in a voice that was barely human, "Why are you here?" A chill ripped through me. Her voice had changed. It wasn't just hoarse anymore. There was something else underneath it, something layered, wrong. I didn't answer. Instead, I focused on the road, my knuckles white as I steered through the thickening darkness. The fog wasn't just behind us anymore. It was starting to materialize in patches ahead, like it was cutting off our escape. I flicked my high beams on. Big mistake. The light barely penetrated the murk, but it illuminated something standing in the road. A figure. At first, I thought it was another person. Then I saw its face. It was the same as mine, the same uniform, the same features, but there was something off. The skin looked wrong, stretched too tightly. The eyes were hollow pits, too wide, too empty. It lifted its hand, and I realized it was mouthing something, not speaking, just moving its lips. I felt a sharp pain in my temples, like a pressure building behind my skull. The woman beside me let out a ragged scream, clawing at her ears. "Do not listen. Do not acknowledge them. Do not let them speak." I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck hurtled forward, straight toward the thing wearing my face. At the last second, it moved. Not out of the way, it blurred, like static on a broken screen. Its body flickered, dissolving into the fog. I tore down the highway, past abandoned cars and darkened buildings, the ghost town of Clearwater rising ahead of us. The woman sobbed beside me. "It's too late," she choked out. I clenched my jaw. "No. We're getting out of here." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's already inside." A sharp chill spread through my chest. "What?" I demanded. She turned to me, her black eyes glassy and vacant. Then her lips moved, but no sound came out. The same silent mouthing I had just seen in the road. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop. My pulse pounded in my ears. "Say that again," I ordered. Her lips moved again, but I still heard nothing. A realization hit me like ice water down my spine. I grabbed my phone with a shaking hand and checked the emergency alert. Directive updated. "Do not let them into your vehicle. Do not acknowledge their presence. They are not real." My breath came fast and shallow. I looked at the woman sitting beside me, at the black-eyed, hollow thing pretending to be her. She tilted her head, and then she smiled. My body moved on instinct. I reached for my sidearm and aimed it directly at her head. "Get out of the truck." The thing wearing her skin didn't react. It just watched me. I cocked the hammer back. I said, "Get the hell out." It blinked slowly. Then, in my own voice, "You shouldn't have come here." My stomach dropped. The thing reached toward me. Fast. Too fast. I fired. The gunshot shattered the silence. The windshield spidered with cracks as the thing's head snapped backward. For a second, it didn't move. Then, its head snapped forward again. The bullet wound in its forehead, sealed shut, and it laughed. A high, fractured sound. I didn't wait. I threw the truck into reverse and kicked open my door. I hit the ground hard, rolling onto the pavement as the truck's wheels screeched. The thing in the passenger seat grinned at me. Then it turned its head completely backward and mouthed something, silent, wordless. A wave of pressure slammed into my skull. I screamed as my vision went white, a piercing ringing in my ears. For a moment, I saw nothing but empty black void. Then suddenly, silence. I opened my eyes. The truck was gone. The fog had thickened, the world around me dark and empty. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling. Another alert had appeared. "Do not stay in one place. Do not let them touch you. Do not look into their eyes." My breath hitched, because below the text, something else had appeared. A live feed. A camera feed. It was looking at me from inside the truck, and in the driver's seat was me. I stared at the live feed on my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. The camera was inside my truck, and something was sitting in the driver's seat. Someone who looked exactly like me. It was watching the road with an eerie stillness, hands resting on the wheel, posture identical to mine. The fog outside the truck swirled, pressing against the windshield, but the thing in my seat didn't react. I swallowed hard. My breath felt too loud in the silence, then turned its head, not toward the road, toward the camera, toward me. I flinched. My hands clenched around my phone. The other me stared through the screen with a cold, unreadable expression. Then its mouth moved, no sound, just mouthing something silently. A wave of pressure built behind my eyes, creeping into my skull, pressing against my thoughts like an invasive presence trying to worm its way inside. I squeezed my eyes shut and tore my gaze away. Do not listen. Do not acknowledge them. Do not let them speak. The warnings repeated over and over in my mind like a mantra. I needed to move. I stuffed the phone back into my pocket and scanned my surroundings. The fog had deepened, swallowing most of the road, but I could still make out the faint outlines of buildings ahead. Clearwater. My best chance was to get to town and find shelter. Maybe find someone, anyone, who could tell me what the hell was going on. I forced my feet to move, pushing through the heavy, unnatural air. With every step, I felt it, the weight of the fog pressing against me, like something was watching, waiting. The town of Echoes. Clearwater was supposed to be a small but active town, a quiet place with diners, gas stations, and homes lined up neatly along the main road. But now it was a graveyard. No lights, no movement, no sound. Storefronts stood empty, doors swinging open, their interiors ransacked. Cars sat abandoned on the streets, some with their driver's side doors open. Others crashed into light poles or storefronts, like everyone had tried to leave at once. I kept moving, keeping my head down. Then something moved in my peripheral vision. I snapped my head toward it, heart racing. Person, or at least it looked like one. A man stood at the far end of the street, half hidden in the thick fog. His back was to me, his posture stiff and unnatural. I hesitated. My instincts told me to call out to see if he needed help. Then I remembered the emergency directive. Do not engage with survivors showing signs of exposure. I swallowed hard. My grip tightened around my flashlight. I turned away and froze, because now there were more of them. At least 6 figures stood further down the road. All of them motionless, all of them facing away from me, their heads tilted at unnatural angles, their arms hanging stiffly at their sides. I took a careful step back. The air around me buzzed, a low, barely perceptible frequency, like a distant radio signal just beyond hearing. Then one of the figures twitched. I stopped breathing. It turned its head slightly, just enough to reveal a sliver of its face. The skin looked wrong, like wax, too smooth, too still. I took another step back. The buzzing frequency grew louder. Then, all at once, the figures began to move. Not walking, not running, glitching. 1 second, they were standing far down the street. The next, they were closer. I stumbled back. My pulse pounded. They weren't walking toward me. They were jumping forward in bursts, flickering through the fog, closing the distance. My chest tightened. I turned and ran. The ground blurred beneath me. My boots slammed against the pavement as I tore through the empty streets, ducking between buildings. My only goal, get away. I sprinted past a diner, its windows shattered, chairs overturned, past a post office, its door hanging open, letters scattered across the ground. The whole town was wrong, like a place caught between 2 realities, one normal, the other something else. I turned a sharp corner and pressed myself against the brick wall of an old convenience store. My breath came in ragged gasps. My hands trembled. Silence. Had I lost them? I risked a glance around the corner. The street was empty. The figures were gone. A heavy dread settled in my stomach. I pulled out my phone, desperate for another update, some kind of instruction. A new emergency alert had appeared. If you see yourself, leave immediately. Do not interact. Do not let it speak. Do not let it follow you. I stared at the message, my skin crawling. Then a whisper, right behind me. I finally found you. A deep, sinking horror filled my chest. I turned slowly and came face to face with myself. The other me stood just inches away. Same uniform, same stance, same face. But the eyes were dead. A hollow black void, filled with nothing. It smiled. And then, in my own voice, "Where are you running to?" My body froze, a suffocating pressure wrapped around my skull, my thoughts clouding. It took all my strength to force myself to move, to run. I pushed past the thing wearing my face and sprinted blindly down the road. Do not interact. Do not let it speak. Do not let it follow you. I ran toward the center of town, not knowing where I was going, only knowing I had to get away. But the other me wasn't far behind, and it was still smiling. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get as far away from it as possible. The other me, the thing wearing my face. The town blurred around me, buildings passing in a haze of flickering streetlights and thickening fog. My boots pounded against the pavement, every breath burning in my lungs. Behind me, I heard footsteps, not running, not even hurried, just following, a steady, deliberate pace, like it knew I couldn't escape. I forced myself to focus. The emergency alert had warned me. Do not let it speak. Do not let it follow you. But how the hell was I supposed to stop it? A sign loomed ahead. Clearwater Police Department. A surge of hope crashed through me. If anyone was still alive in this godforsaken town, they'd be there. If not, at least I'd find weapons. I veered toward the station, pushing myself harder. The doors were still intact, the windows unbroken. That meant something, right? I slammed into the entrance, nearly stumbling as I shoved inside and locked the door behind me. Silence. The air inside was stale, like the building had been sealed for years. I turned my flashlight on. The lobby was empty, desks abandoned, chairs toppled over, papers littered the floor. The radio behind the front desk crackled with static, but no voices came through. A fresh wave of dread settled in my gut. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. I gritted my teeth. There had to be an armory, weapons, panic room, something. I moved cautiously through the station, stepping over scattered files and broken coffee mugs. The fog outside pressed against the windows, thicker now, swirling unnaturally in slow, deliberate patterns. Then I saw it, the holding cells. The doors were slightly ajar, and inside, someone was standing there. A man, hunched over, dressed in a Clearwater PD uniform. I stopped breathing. His back was to me, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then he twitched, a violent, jerking movement. A deep, gut-wrenching instinct told me to leave, but I had to know. I stepped closer. "Officer," no response. I took another step. The radio on the desk blared to life. A voice, distorted, broken. "Where are you running to?" My blood turned to ice. I spun around, and the other me was standing inside the station, on the other side of the glass. It was watching me, smiling. I stumbled back. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. The officer in the cell twitched again. Then his head turned toward me, and I saw his eyes, black voids. His mouth opened. First, there was nothing, just gaping silence. Then, a soundless scream. A wave of pressure slammed into my skull. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as my thoughts fractured. The lights overhead flickered, the whole building groaning like it was coming apart at the seams. I forced myself to move. Get up, get up, get up. I crawled toward the nearest desk, gripping the edge and hauling myself to my feet. The officer was still screaming, but there was no sound, just that awful pressure drilling into my head. I had to get out. I staggered toward the hallway, pushing through the pain. The other me was still there, standing in the doorway, his head tilted slightly. Then it spoke, not loud, not forceful, just a whisper, but I felt it inside my skull. "You shouldn't have come here." My vision blurred, the world warped. I slammed into a wall, my head spinning, my limbs suddenly heavy. I tried to fight it, tried to pull away from the voice curling around my thoughts like static. Then my phone buzzed. I forced myself to look at the screen. A new emergency alert. Do not respond. Do not engage. Get to higher ground. Higher ground. I gritted my teeth. I had to get to the roof. I turned and ran. The walls around me shimmered, the building twisting, shifting, the air growing thick and unreal. The other me didn't move, just watched, smiling. I shoved through the door leading to the stairwell and took the steps two at a time. Each step felt like moving through mud, like the air itself was trying to pull me backward. I reached the top and burst onto the roof. The fog was everywhere now, a writhing, living mass. But above me, the sky was clear. The stars, the moon, real, tangible. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something else. In the distance, far beyond the fog, a tower, a radio tower, a beacon of red light pulsing in the night. I didn't know why, but I knew that was my way out. Then a voice right behind me. It's too late. I turned. The other me was standing at the stairwell entrance. The fog swirled around it, pulling it forward. Took a slow step toward me. You're already one of us. The radio tower blinked. The fog thickened, and I knew this was my last chance to escape. The other me took a slow step forward. The fog moved with it, wrapping around its body like a second skin. I could feel the air shift, the pressure growing heavier, denser, like I was standing at the bottom of an unseen ocean. The ground beneath my feet felt unstable, as if the entire rooftop wasn't solid anymore. I backed away toward the edge of the roof. The radio tower in the distance blinked red, cutting through the night like a heartbeat. I didn't know why, but I knew that was my way out. I had to reach it. I had to move now. The other me cocked its head slightly. Then it lunged, not running, not walking, just glitching forward. 1 second it was by the stairwell. The next it was right in front of me. I barely had time to react. I threw myself sideways, dodging at the last second. My shoulder hit the rooftop hard, pain jolting through my arm, but I forced myself up. The thing wearing my face turned slowly, its black eyes empty, dead. It wasn't in a rush. It knew I had nowhere to go, except I did. My eyes locked onto the rooftop's edge, the fire escape. It was my only chance. I sprinted. The other me didn't move at first. Then, just as I reached the ledge, it whispered. I didn't hear the words. I felt them, like a spike driven into my skull, like static threading into my veins. I staggered, gripping my head. My vision fractured, reality splitting apart like a broken mirror. The world flickered. I saw a town that wasn't a town. Buildings, but they weren't buildings. Hollow things, standing in the fog like shadows of something that had once been real. A main street that stretched forever. Figures standing motionless, their backs turned, waiting. And then something else. Presence. Watching. Waiting. My pulse slammed in my ears. I forced myself forward, ripping out of whatever that vision had been. My fingers found the fire escape railing. I threw myself over the edge. My boots slammed against the metal grating as I bolted down the escape. Each step echoed, too loud in the unnatural silence. The other me didn't follow. Not immediately. It just stood there watching, smiling. And then softly, it mouthed something. I didn't wait to find out what. I hit the ground and ran. Through the dead town. Clearwater was gone. Not just abandoned. Something deeper. The town itself felt wrong, like it was unraveling at the edges. The fog curled around the buildings, seeping through shattered windows and open doorways like fingers reaching for something unseen. Shapes moved inside the fog, things I couldn't see clearly. I kept running. Streetlights flickered overhead. The radio tower loomed ahead, its blinking red light cutting through the dark. I didn't know what I'd find there, but it was the only real thing left. As I ran, my phone buzzed. A new emergency alert. You are not alone. They see you. Keep moving. I shoved my phone away and picked up the pace. Somewhere behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps. Not mine. Not the other me's. Something else. Something that wasn't human. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I just ran. The red light, the radio tower's chain link fence came into view. It was tall, but not impossible to climb. I grabbed onto the metal links and hauled myself up. The metal bit into my palms, the cold seeping into my bones, but I didn't stop. Halfway up, I heard it, a low, distorted voice, right behind me. I didn't understand the words, didn't have to. The pressure hit me instantly, pressing against my skull like a vice. I nearly lost my grip. My fingers slipped. I caught myself just in time. Keep moving. I forced myself upward. The whispers followed, each one pressing against my thoughts, trying to dig inside, trying to rewrite me. I reached the top, threw myself over, and fell hard onto the ground. Pain exploded through my ribs, but I got up. I sprinted toward the tower door. It was open. I didn't stop to think. I ran inside and slammed the door shut. Inside the tower, the air inside was different. The pressure eased. The whispers faded. I leaned against the wall, catching my breath. My hands trembled. My whole body ached. The interior of the tower was old. Rusted metal and broken equipment scattered across the floor, but the power was still on. The red warning light pulsed overhead, casting long shadows against the walls. I spotted a control panel, a radio. It was on. A steady, rhythmic signal hummed through the speaker. I stepped closer, picked up the mic. My voice came out hoarse. Hello. First, nothing. Then, a response. You made it. My stomach dropped. The voice was mine, not the thing outside, not the other me, but me. From the other end of the radio, the red light flashed. The static rose, and then softly, the voice spoke again. Don't let them leave. A chill crawled down my spine. I turned slowly and saw the door unlocking by itself. Something was coming inside, something that looked just like me. The lock clicked open. The door, steel, heavy, shifted slightly, as if something just on the other side was testing it. My breath caught in my throat. The radio signal buzzed behind me, pulsing in time with the red warning light. And then the handle turned. I reacted instinctively. I lunged forward, shoving my weight against the door just as it started to push inward. Something on the other side pushed back. A slow, deliberate pressure. Not rushed, not frantic, like it knew I couldn't hold it back forever. The steel felt cold under my palms, vibrating with an almost electrical hum. From the radio, my own voice crackled through the static. You have to broadcast. Now, I squeezed my eyes shut. No time to question. No time to think. I just had to act. With one last desperate push, I kicked away from the door and bolted toward the control panel. The equipment was old, layers of dust coating the switches and dials, but the power was still running. A frequency display glowed dimly, a steady waveform pulsing across the screen. There was already a signal being transmitted, a repeating tone, something rhythmic, constant, like a heartbeat. I grabbed the broadcast mic, took a shaky breath. Then the door swung open. I barely had time to process it. The fog rushed inside, rolling in like a living thing. The temperature plummeted, and from the darkness, I stepped in. The other me. It stood in the doorway, framed by the pulsing red light. The fog curled around it, moving with it, like the entire atmosphere of this town answered to it. It had my face, my height, my clothes, but the eyes, black, a void where there should have been life. I stepped forward. The radio hissed behind me, then it spoke. You've come so far. The voice was mine, perfectly replicated, not distorted, not broken, just me. I felt my stomach turn. I gripped the broadcast mic tighter. I didn't know what I was supposed to say, what I was supposed to do. I glanced at the control panel. One switch stood out, transmit live. Whatever was already playing, it wasn't enough. I had to speak. I had to warn people. I reached for the switch, and the other me moved. Not a normal movement, a flicker, like a glitch in reality. 1 second, it was by the door. The next, right beside me. I felt its presence before I could react. Cold, overwhelming. His breath brushed my ear. They can hear you. I threw myself backward. My hand slammed against the switch. The signal cut, and then silence. Live transmission. I brought the mic to my lips. I had no script, no plan, just raw, sheer survival. I forced the words out. This is. My voice broke. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. This is a message to anyone listening. The other me tilted its head slightly. It didn't react with anger, didn't move to stop me, just watched, waiting. I kept going. I don't know how much time I have, but if you can hear this, if you're outside Clearwater, do not enter the town. The fog outside shifted violently, as if it heard me. The lights overhead flickered. I kept speaking. The emergency alerts are real. The fog isn't just weather. It changes things. It replaces people. If you see someone that looks like you, if you hear something wearing your voice, I hesitated. The other me was still watching, still smiling. Do not listen, the radio screeched. A wave of static pressure slammed into me. I staggered, gripping the desk. The control panel shook, the lights on the switches flashing wildly. The The fog surged inside. Couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they were filled with static. The other me stepped closer. I felt it speaking inside my head. Not words, just something else. Something deeper. A rewrite. I fought against it. I had to finish the broadcast. I grabbed the mic again, forcing out the words. If you can still hear this. My vision blurred. Reality warped. The fog pressed in. The other me reached out and touched my arm. For a split second, I felt it. The truth. A flood of images. A town swallowed by fog, rewritten by something ancient. People vanishing. Others replaced. The emergency system trying to fight back. Failing. The signal was the only thing keeping them at bay. Keeping them contained. But the town wasn't the end goal. They were expanding. Spreading. Clearwater was just the beginning. My stomach dropped. I gritted my teeth and finished the message. If you hear the signal, stay away from the fog. The radio screeched. The tower shook. The other me whispered one last thing. Not a threat. Not a warning. Just a statement. You shouldn't have said that. The lights cut out. The radio exploded into static. And then the floor dropped out beneath me. I was falling. Not the kind of falling that makes your stomach lurch. This was different. It was slow, like sinking into deep water. The world above slipping further and further away. The red light from the tower blinked one last time before it vanished into the nothing below me. The air was gone. The radio signal was gone. Even the pressure that had pressed against my skull before, it had faded, replaced by something worse. Stillness. A silence so perfect it felt like the universe had just stopped. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Then, through the darkness, I saw something, or maybe I felt it first. A shape, something vast, incomprehensible. It wasn't a figure. It wasn't a creature. It was like looking at a hole in reality itself. A void that twisted and writhed in slow, fluid movements, and within it faces, hundreds, thousands. Some I recognized, others I had never seen before. They were shifting, changing, melting into one another like ink dripping into water. And then I saw mine, echoes of myself. It wasn't just one version of me, it was dozens. Some looked just like I did now, dirted, desperate, fighting to survive. Others were different. One of them had no eyes. Another had a mouth that stretched too wide, splitting open at the corners. One was just a silhouette, twitching violently. They all turned toward me at once, and then they spoke, not with their mouths, inside my head. You are not supposed to be here. The words cracked like a breaking radio signal, splitting apart before coming back together. I forced myself to move, except I couldn't. I was still falling, suspended in nothingness, surrounded by shifting versions of myself. One of them, one with no mouth, reached for me. His fingers brushed my arm, and the second it did, I felt everything. Memories that weren't mine. Moments from lives I had never lived. A version of me that never ran to the radio tower. Instead, he let the fog take him. Another that didn't fight at all. He became something else entirely. And then the worst one, a version of me that had never existed at all. Just an echo, something rewritten. I ripped myself away. Stop, I gasped, my voice barely breaking through the silence. I don't belong here. The figures, the other versions of me, tilted their heads. And then one of them stepped forward. The choice. This version was identical to me. No distortions. No empty eyes. Just me. He stared at me for a long moment before he finally spoke. Then you have a choice. The void behind him shifted, forming something new. Pathway. It wasn't a road, wasn't stairs, just a direction. One led upward, the other down. I didn't need to be told what each meant. Up meant going back. Back to the tower. Back to Clearwater. Back to a world that had already started to change. Down meant something else, something worse. I swallowed. What happens if I go down? I asked. The other me didn't blink. You become part of it. I felt my breath catch. I already knew what it was. The fog. The thing that had been rewriting people. I glanced toward the other path, the way back up. I didn't trust it, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here. I turned to face the other me. I'm going back. His expression didn't change. For a second, I thought he would stop me. Then he simply stepped aside. I didn't hesitate. I moved toward the path leading up. The second I did, I felt the weight of the void pressing against me, trying to pull me back down. The other figures, the broken versions of myself, watched in silence. I didn't look back. I just kept moving. Waking up in the fog, I gasped for air. It felt like being dragged from the bottom of the ocean. My lungs burned, my vision swam, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I saw the red light, the radio tower. I was back, but something was wrong. I was no longer inside the control room. I was outside on the ground, and the fog was thicker than before. It pressed against the world like a living thing, curling around the buildings, creeping toward the radio tower's steel beams. I pushed myself up. My body ached, but I was alive. The last thing I remembered was the other me, the broadcast. I spun, looking toward the tower. The door was open, but inside, the room was empty. The equipment was destroyed. The broadcast signal was gone. No, I stumbled forward, grabbing at the ruined radio. I twisted knobs, flipped switches, nothing. The signal was dead. The emergency alert system was gone. I sucked in a breath, then froze. In the distance, I heard it. A sound carried through the fog. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned my head and I saw them. Figures, not just one, dozens, standing in the fog, motionless, their faces hidden, watching me, waiting. The emergency system was gone. The signal was off, and now nothing was stopping them anymore. They didn't move. The figures in the fog stood motionless, barely visible through the swirling gray. I counted at least a dozen, but I knew there were more. Hundreds, maybe, watching, waiting. Something about their stillness was unnerving. It wasn't natural hesitation, it was like they had no need to rush, like they already knew they had one. I took a step back. The ground beneath me felt wrong. The dirt was cold, too soft, almost like I was stepping on something that wasn't supposed to be here. The radio tower loomed behind me, red light still blinking faintly, but it was useless now. The signal was dead. I had no idea how long it had been down. Could have been seconds, could have been hours. And if the alert wasn't broadcasting anymore, then there was nothing keeping them here. I felt something deep in my gut, an instinct I couldn't ignore. If I stayed, if I hesitated even a second longer, they would move. I turned and ran. The fog is moving. The fog wasn't just thick. It was alive. It rolled and curled like it was shifting to block my way, tendrils stretching across the ground, reaching toward me like fingers. I bolted across the empty lot, my footsteps crunching against the dirt. Somewhere in the distance, I saw the outlines of buildings, the remains of Clearwater, but they were different now. The houses weren't just abandoned, they were distorted. Windows were too wide, roofs slanted at impossible angles. Some doors were missing, replaced by gaping black holes that led into nothing. The town wasn't just empty, it had been rewritten, and I wasn't sure how much of it was real anymore. No more safe zones. I skidded to a stop near an intersection. The street signs were wrong. Instead of words, they had symbols, shapes I didn't recognize, twisting and shifting if I looked at them for too long. The whole town was changing. Without the broadcast signal, the emergency system wasn't keeping anything in check anymore. The fog wasn't contained. It was spreading. I turned my head slightly. The figures were still there, not running, not rushing, just walking, slow, steady, and they were getting closer. I needed to leave. The road out. I knew where I had to go. The highway. It was the only way out of Clearwater. If I could just make it there, if I could drive, run, crawl if I had to, I might still have a chance. I sprinted toward the main road, but the fog moved with me. It wasn't just covering the town anymore. It was following me, curling around buildings, swallowing streets whole, like it didn't want me to leave. I pushed forward, lungs burning. The edge of town was close now. I could see the street leading out, the faint glow of the highway lights in the distance. For the first time, I thought maybe I could make it. Then I saw something that made me stop cold. The road didn't exist anymore. The highway, the only way out of Clearwater, was gone. Not blocked, not covered in fog, just gone. The road stretched out for about 20 feet and then it ended. Beyond it, there was just nothing, like the world had been cut off. I stared at it, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. No, this wasn't real. It had to be the fog. It had to be a trick, right? I took a slow step forward. The closer I got, the more I realized it wasn't a trick. There was no road, no ground, no sky, just an endless, yawning void, like the world outside of Clearwater had never existed at all, and I was trapped inside it. The final broadcast. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. There was no way out. The radio tower was useless. The town was changing, shifting into something else. The fog had won. I heard footsteps behind me. They weren't slow anymore. They were close. I turned, and I saw them. The figures in the fog had finally moved in. They stood just feet away now, faces still obscured, but I could feel them, their presence, the overwhelming, suffocating wrongness. And then one of them stepped forward. The fog curled around them, shifting, flickering, and suddenly I wasn't looking at a stranger anymore. I was looking at myself, not the broken version from the void, not one of the half-formed echoes I had seen before. No, this was me, perfectly. Every detail was right. Same clothes, same injuries, same expression of wide-eyed, breathless horror. They spoke, my own voice. You should have stayed quiet. I felt my knees buckle. My head swam. I had seen this before, not just once, hundreds of times. Flashes of other versions of myself, other lives. I had done this before. I had run. I had tried to escape, and every time I had failed. The realization hit me like a weight pressing against my skull. There was no winning. There was no getting out. Clearwater wasn't just a town. It was a loop, a cycle that had played out over and over again. And I was just one version of many. I took a step back, and my other self smiled. Don't worry, they said. Their voice was so calm. You'll get used to it. The fog takes me. The figures in the fog moved all at once. They surrounded me, their presence like a cold, overwhelming force pressing in on all sides. I tried to fight, tried to run, but it was too late. The fog rushed forward, and I felt myself slipping, not dying, not vanishing, just changing, like the town had, like everyone else had, like I had done before. And then everything went dark. Final emergency alert transmission. Signal lost. Emergency alert system. No signal detected. Transmission failure. Please stand by. And just like that, I was gone.